Good afternoon, Irish Breakdown fans. My name is Vince Dara. I'm the football analyst here at irishbreakdown.com. And with me, as always, is my guy in the new hat, Brian Driscoll. He is the publisher at irishbreakdown.com. Thank you for modeling the new hat there, Brian.
I dig it, man. I Vince, you're going to have to swing by later today after baseball and show you all the new gear.
Man.
But, yeah, I'm excited about it. So
and if
everything turned out nice.
Yeah.
And so we're close to launching the store, so we're ready to go.
Absolutely. The store should be coming out soon. Visor, hats, polo shirts, water bottle that will look a little different than this, but same idea.
And I'm thinking about not launching that one because they have now gone 0 for 2 on getting that one correct.
Oh, really?
So
okay.
That might not be initially part of the store, but we do have stickers that people can put on their favorite water bottles.
Oh,
so, like I said, I don't want to put anything out there that's not quality.
Absolutely.
And so far, I've been a little disappointed in the water bottle, but everything else looks great. The coffee mug looks great. We're gonna, just got a lot going on, so I'm very excited.
Absolutely. So today, Brian, we are going to kick off kind of our post-spring positional breakdown, and we're going to go through every position. And every time that I'm on, we're gonna hit a position, and we're gonna go offense, defense, or we're gonna go okay. So
we're gonna go like D-line on tomorrow. So you'll be with us tomorrow. We'll go D-line tomorrow, and then we'll go back and forth offense, defense.
All right. So we'll one of each week until school is over, and then
except Friday
get going
because Friday.
Is one
Friday free for all.
We got 2 positional breakdowns a week, and then Friday free for all. And then when school's over in about 2 weeks, then it's summertime, baby, and we start rolling. So, but today, as I said, we're going to kick it off. We're going to talk quarterbacks. We're going to talk about the depth chart. We're going to talk about what our expectations were, what they are now, all of that. And so quarterback, obviously that's the biggest topic for most people to want to talk about. Notre Dame loses a 2.5-year starter in Ian Book. That I guess that the best way to put it is people either loved him or hated him. Wasn't a whole lot of in between. But he's gone now, and so he must be replaced. And Notre Dame went out in the grad transfer portal. They brought in Jack Coan. Of course, they brought in heralded quarterback Tyler Buchner, who has only played 1 year of football in 3 years. So there's that aspect of it. And of course, already in house, they already had Drew Pyne. And my mind is drawing a blank right now on the injured quarterback,
Brendan Clark.
Thank you very much. Brendan Clark, out of sight, out of mind, I guess. Brendan Clark is also in the room still. So there's 4 quarterbacks that we need to talk about. 5 if you include Ronnie Paulus III, but he's in that room as well. And in theory, I hear on scholarship, so I guess he's part of the conversation. But going into spring, I think we kind of understood where this might be going, but I think we got a lot more clarification on that through spring, Brian.
Yeah, I mean, look, Vince, there was sort of, we kind of had an idea of what might happen as we go through the spring, but you needed to see it. You needed to find out, is Jack Coan going to be able to adjust and play in the Notre Dame offense at the level or an even greater level than he did in the Wisconsin offense? Is Drew Pyne going to be good enough to give him a battle, which I think is going to make Jack Coan better? Is Tyler, we had a big question marks about Tyler Buchner's throwing motion because the last time we had seen him working out, he had this really
big
awkward,
11, right?
Yeah, really awkward throwing motion.
Or Elite 11, excuse me.
Yeah, and so to me, there's a lot of questions about the quarterback depth chart going into the spring. And coming out of the spring, we still have some question marks that we'll address during the show. But to me, I'm far more encouraged and happy about the quarterback position now than I was going into the spring, to the point where, we have our opinions on who's going to start, but I don't think it matters as much. I'm in a situation now, Vince, where I'm confident that if Jack Coan's a starting quarterback, he's going to have a big year. If Drew Pyne beats him out, he's going to have a big year. If they play Tyler Buchner, he's going to have a big year. Now, the manner in which they will play and those type of things is certainly going to change and be altered. But in regards to whether or not Notre Dame is going to have good enough quarterback play to take a big jump on offense this season, I'm confident that they will. Yeah, and I think we saw enough things. Go ahead, man.
No, I was going to say, I think, if anybody follows our podcast and our videos and what we normally talk about, going into spring, before anything in spring started, one of the big kicks that you and I were on was there needs to be a change in philosophy offensively in order for this team to take the next step. And I think we can both agree that philosophy that we were looking for is starting to take place. It's starting to take place. And we like the direction that it's going. And what I will say to that is that philosophy is more quarterback friendly. As far as from a statistical standpoint, I think there's going to be a lot more easy throws. Throws to get the ball into the hands of guys who can make plays, right? And we know Notre Dame has those guys. I mean, that's obviously a conversation for later. But what I'm saying is, from a statistical standpoint, I think that this offensive philosophy, the one that we believe is being instituted and that will continue to be ingrained into this offense, is going to be more friendly to the quarterback position. It's about making quick decisions. It's about getting the ball out of your hands. It's about short throws, right? RPO situations. It's more quarterback friendly than, reading all the way through some of these different progressions and things of that nature. So I think the philosophy of the offense is going to help the quarterback position. And then on top of that, the play that we saw from the quarterbacks also lends me to believe that I agree with you. The quarterbacks are going to have a big year. I feel like it's kind of a two-pronged situation here.
Now, those things were added to what Notre Dame will also be doing, which is there will be some more in-depth reads. There will be throwing the ball down the field, all those types of things. But, and that's the other thing, too, is I think that is not being talked about enough, or maybe is being overlooked, is when I have conversations with people about Jack Coan. And let's just kind of dive right into first with Jack Coan. Since right now I do anticipate him being the starter. I don't think it's set in stone, but I think right now he was the most efficient, effective quarterback in the spring from what we saw, from the sources that I've talked to. And then, of course, what we saw from him previously during his time at Wisconsin. And he's accurate. He makes good decisions he had that one bad decision in the blue gold game. That's going to happen. You can live with that. But when you get in these situations, you saw accuracy. You saw him throwing with great anticipation. He's cocking back and about to release the ball when guys are getting to the top end of their route. We rarely saw that for years at Notre Dame. And this isn't an Ian Book thing. This is something going back before Ian Book was the quarterback. That's been an issue at Notre Dame. So, I think that he's got that part of the game, which is so important, and that's one of those things that made Mac Jones so effective. I'm not saying he's going to be Mac Jones. I'm just making the point.
No, but it was his anticipation. Right. It was his fitting balls into windows that some guys are afraid to try to push into those windows or couldn't push into
throwing guys open. That's a big part of it. And so it's one of those things you don't have to have a Justin Fields, Trevor Lawrence, Zach Wilson kind of arm to be an elite quarterback or a dominant quarterback if you have it up here as well.
Especially at college.
Right. And so we saw some of those traits from Jack Coan. But the other thing that's not being discussed enough is how effective he is throwing the ball downfield. I've done an article about this at irishbreakdown.com. You can check it out. I expect the deep ball to improve. Now, I don't think he's got as good of a deep ball arm as Ian Book had, but I think he's a more confident deep ball thrower. He's a more accurate deep ball thrower. And those two things are every bit as important, if not more so, than just raw arm strength. Ian Book was not an overly accurate downfield thrower, and he was mostly a reluctant downfield thrower. Jack Coan completed 4 balls in the blue gold game past 20 yards.
Right.
I mean, that gets you on, just so for context, if that's kind of what he averaged during the regular season, that would get him to 48. I think if my math is, no, actually more than that. It'd get him to, 48. 12 times 4 is 48. 48 completions on deep balls, balls 20-plus yards. Well, Ian Book's best year at Notre Dame, he completed 33 in 13 games. So that just gives you some context of how impressive it is to complete 4 balls and 20 yards down the field in an offensive system that was being relatively vanilla in how it was attacking teams.
Right.
And they came out first play of the game and went deep. And I don't think that's unintentional. I mean, that's what they're going to do. This is going to be an aggressive offense. Sure. Because the reality is, Vince, is you cannot be effective with RPOs, with quick game, with all the stuff that we talked about if you're also not willing to attack teams deep, because then they're just going to sit on everything.
You got that right. And RPOs are generally slants, bubbles, things of that nature. So it's all short stuff. And if you don't have the ability or the willingness to go downfield, then defenses are just going to come down and they're going to take away from you. And so
Right.
you have to be effective throwing the ball downfield. Now, I will also say that the RPO game and the philosophy that this offense is going to have about getting the ball into the playmakers' hands quickly, I will say that will open up deep balls a little bit more. So when you start peppering them, width-wise and short-wise, teams are going to come up. Right?
Those two things go hand in hand.
That's absolutely correct. It's difficult to be successful in one without being successful in the other, because any good football coach will tell you we can take away what you're best at, but you can't take away everything. So you have to be able to be good at both. So if that's effective, then the long ball is going to be effective, and vice versa. They play off of each other. Same thing with run game / pass game, right? You have to be able to.
And that's what I think Jack Coan is good at. I mean, that's the thing I like about it is, yes, his bread and butter is going to be quick accuracy, attacking the short to intermediates, but he's a willing deep ball guy, and they have enough deep ball weapons. I mean, we saw Lawrence Keys making plays down the field. The tight ends are going to make plays down the field.
Absolutely.
They've got Braden Lindsey that can make plays down the field. We didn't really see him do that much in the blue gold game.
That's okay.
He also wasn't on the same side of the field as Jack Coan. We saw Avery Davis making plays down the field. We're going to see the running backs making plays down the field. So you've got deep ball weapons. And now you have a quarterback, in my opinion, that is going to be a more willing and effective deep ball thrower. And I think sometimes people say, well, he doesn't have a big arm. Okay, fine. This is college football. This isn't the NFL.
You don't have
big arm is not. And now, is he going to be throwing the 65-yard bombs over the top of the defense that we saw from Justin Fields and Trevor Lawrence? No, but those, you could count on one hand the number of times that's going to happen in the season someplace like that. So that's what I saw from Jack Coan, Vince. And, I see a guy that was what I expected him to be going into the spring.
Steady.
Yes.
Smart, a leader.
But also willing to take chances.
Yeah.
And that's going to get him in trouble sometimes. I mean, he's going to throw a pick or two.
We saw him take chances at Wisconsin. Some of the film that we watched, he took chances. Right. There's no question about it.
My hope is that Notre Dame doesn't kind of beat out of him that willingness to be aggressive. Yeah. And I'm more referring to here to the head coach, that beat out of that willingness to be aggressive. Because if you take that away and he's just – you get back to the conservative aspects of what we've seen in recent years – it's going to make him far less effective, because teams are just going to sit on what you're doing.
Sure.
And you don't have the offensive line to be able to get away with that this year. So that's what I'm hoping to see, Vince. And I think that if they let him play his game, if we see this offense continue to evolve the way that it started to in the spring, if we see them utilize all of their weapons that they currently have, because it's a different type of receiver than they had last year. They don't have the big power forwards that they've had in recent seasons. And, and that's a positive. That's not a criticism. I mean, I wouldn't have a problem if they wanted to have another Miles Boykin and Chase Claypool on the outside.
Sure.
It's simply saying it's a different type of receiver. And that requires a different type of pass. I mean, look, what you need to do schematically, philosophically, to be effective with a receiving core that's made up of where your biggest guy is 6'2",
right,
is a whole lot different. And you've got a bunch of 5'11s and 5'10 and a halves and guys like that running around, is a whole lot different than what you're going to do schematically and philosophically when you've got Chase Claypool on one side and Miles Boykin on the other. Not better, not worse, just different.
Sure.
And I think that difference is going to be fit right into what I think Jack Coan is going to be good at. Quick decision maker, accurate, willing to take some chances.
I agree.
So
I like the fact, just to kind of piggyback off of your point there about the big receivers and the smaller receivers and things. I kind of like the fact that they don't necessarily have big receivers this year, because it forces Tommy Rees and the offense to evolve a little bit, or to change what they do. Because, look, having those guys was a security blanket. I mean, it was a security blanket for Ian Book. It was a security blanket for Tommy Rees and / Brian Kelly.
Yeah, I'd say more so Brian Kelly than Tommy Rees in my opinion.
I would agree. I would completely agree. But having different personnel now is forcing them to kind of turn the page, or at least read from a different page on the playbook, right? So
different chapter.
I do like that. I really do.
Yeah, I think it does force them to say, look, we're gonna have to change how we think, how we go about things. We can't just have our receivers run blocking the whole game. I mean, look, you almost kind of have to do RPOs. If you're gonna ask Braden Lindsey and Lawrence Keys and Avery Davis and and Lorenzo Styles and guys like that to block the way you asked Javon McKinley and Ben Skoranek and Chase Claypool and Miles Boykin, then you're just not a good football coach. And I don't think either one of us are sitting here thinking Brian Kelly's anything other than a really, really good football coach.
Right.
And same with Tommy Rees. So I expect them to understand that. Go ahead.
Can we explain that a little bit? So when they were asking the big guys to block, right? That's one way to skin a cat. Another way to keep those defensive guys occupied is to run an RPO.
Right.
Because those defensive players have to respect the routes that those guys are running. So it's essentially almost like you're blocking them.
Yeah,
because
you're occupying them.
I just wanted to throw that.
Because it's like, look, when you've got Miles Boykin and Chase Claypool, and they're very good blockers. Javon McKinley was a very good blocker this year. You can run perimeter throws or runs. You can run inside zone runs, and you can get those guys down to the safety level and be very effective. Javon McKinley opened up several runs this year with his perimeter blocking. Ben Skoranek was a solid blocker as well. And, you're not going to – Braden Lindsey's going to give effort in the run game. He always has. You go back and watch 2018, he gave effort in the run game. But he's 185 pounds. Lawrence Keys is 180 pounds. Avery Davis is less than 200 pounds. Those guys are not going to be lined up on slot linebackers or corners and safeties and be able to move them the way that those big guys did. Chase Claypool was 230 pounds. So how are ways that you can effectively occupy those guys with your smaller players? And what we've seen from like Devontae Smith. Alabama had asked Devontae Smith to block, but it wasn't a ton. And he gave good effort, but it was also like, what's the best way I can occupy the safety of Devontae Smith? Is it for me to ask him to go block Kyle Hamilton? Or is it for me to ask him to run a corner route that's hopefully going to force Kyle Hamilton to defend him, and we're running an RPO around it or whatever the case may be?
Right. More than one way to skin a cat, as they say. So let's talk about the forgotten man in this whole thing, and Drew Pyne. And you and I both dig Drew Pyne. I mean, I think that, like you said earlier, if he gets the reins of this offense, I think he could be very successful. I really do. I don't want to say it's unfortunate for him that Jack Coan is there. It is to a degree, but it's going to allow him to learn and grow as well. But if he goes out and beats Jack Coan, if this is a legit competition, which I think that it is,
I believe it is. Yeah.
If he goes out and beats up Jack Coan, that even better for Notre Dame. And I believe that is a possibility. I don't think it's going to happen. I believe it's a possibility. But Drew Pyne can do just about everything that Jack Coan can do and make this offense as effective as it needs to be.
I think the one thing that we saw from the spring from Drew Pyne in regards to him needing to improve to be on the same level of Jack Coan is essentially just experience. And what I mean by that is, Drew Pyne got heated up a little bit more than Jack Coan did in the blue gold game from the defense because his offensive line wasn't doing as good of a job. And I think that affected Drew more than it would have if he was a fifth-year senior who had started an entire season and led his team to a Big Ten championship and played in a Rose Bowl, right? So everything that I think that Jack Coan is better than Drew Pyne right now is about experience. The only other thing he has is about 3 more inches on him. Well, to some people, that's something you're going to obsess over. I don't obsess over that.
Not at the college level. I really don't.
No. Well, I mean, even in the NFL, it doesn't matter. I mean, look, 2 of the last 4 number 1 draft picks. You had Trevor Lawrence was 6'6". He's a big guy. Joe Burrow 6'4". The 2 guys before that were 5'10" and a half and 6 foot.
True.
And they were number 1 picks, and they're good NFL football players. They were great college players. It just look in a shotgun offense, it doesn't matter as much.
And you've explained that before.
Right. Yeah. But with Drew Pyne, in my opinion, I think it's a situation where, he does a lot of the things that I think Jack Coan does. He throws with good anticipation. He throws with good timing and good accuracy. He's also a gutsy quarterback. He's willing to take chances. And we saw that in practice clips where he would throw some gorgeous downfield throws. He's also an aggressive downfield thrower. I think what we saw in the blue gold game was he's not a guy that to me right now has the experience yet to say, okay, this is what's happening. I'm getting pressured, so I'm going to do these types of things.
And there's something to that. People need to understand that there is something to having been there before, right? And playing for Wisconsin, that's big boy football. I mean, it is. And
they played Ohio State twice. They played Penn. I believe they played a top 10 Minnesota team on the road. They played Michigan that year, beat the crap out of Michigan that year.
But yeah, I there is something
Yeah.
to be said for experience, and that's what Drew Pyne is lacking. But again,
and that's what he got in the blue gold game. I mean,
Sure.
that was an opportunity for him under somewhat of a live situation to get that experience. And
yeah,
that to me is all that Drew's lacking. I mean, if Drew would have
Yeah.
played more last year, if they would have done a better job as a staff getting their quarterbacks in the game, which meant being more convincing and decisive in some games where you should have been more convincing and decisive,
true.
that maybe he'd be a little bit further along. But that's the thing that I think right now holds Drew Pyne back. But at the same time, one of the questions that remains is, now that Drew has gotten all these reps during the 14 practices, during the blue gold game, how is that going to jump him in this offseason? Because here's the thing, Vince. Jack Coan is going to improve from the standpoint of he's going to continue to get more comfortable in the offense and those type of things. But usually there's a lot more room for a rising sophomore to make a big jump over the summer than there is for a fifth-year senior. Now, it's a little bit different in this situation simply because this fifth-year senior is still learning the offense and still learning his teammates. But it's a situation where he's physically not going to have as much development or experientially going to have as much of a jump, whereas Drew Pyne, I think, is going to make a bigger jump. So I think this battle's far from over, although I still expect Jack Coan to win it because I think Jack Coan's a really good football player. So those are the things that I look at and say, Drew Pyne is a talented football player that several years ago, to me, I view him as a better thrower, not as athletic version of Ian Book, but a better thrower. And he is, to me, Drew Pyne can be what Brian Kelly thought Ian Book was, which is, sit in the pocket, pick teams apart, be accurate, and those kind of things. And when Ian Book did that, he was really good. 2018 was an example of that. But Drew is going to be that guy that's not going to bail and get out of the pocket as quickly as Ian did, and he's going to let things develop. Jack Coan's going to let things develop, and I think those are things that are going to help the offense this year.
Yes.
And so, I say, well, they're not going to have as much of running, but look, they didn't call designed runs very often for Ian Book last year. It was all scrambles in the pass game. So you're going to lose that, but what you're going to see now is, instead of a quarterback trying to run, you're going to see him dumping off to Kyron Williams, dumping off to Chris Tyree, dumping off to Michael Mayer, dumping off to Braden Lindsey, dumping off to Lawrence Keys, and let those guys go do damage. So it'll balance itself out. And again, one's not better, one's not worse. It's just different. And I think those are the things that we're going to see, what those two quarterbacks bring to the table. And honestly, if Jack Coan didn't transfer to Notre Dame, I'd be confident that Drew Pyne would right now be
there would be a learning curve. There would be a learning curve, I feel, once the season started. But the schedule sets up nicely enough that would allow for that learning curve, right?
Yeah, but I also think that the changes that we've seen them make on offense, Vince, are going to allow that to be. Again, you're not asking him to run a ton of vertical stuff and full field reads. And you've got the talent around him to allow him to get the ball out relatively quickly. So when you look at a Drew Pyne, you say, there would be in a bit of a growing pains, but as you've mentioned many times, the growing pains are set up nicely when you look at the teams are going to play. And Florida State's not going to be a cakewalk by any stretch of the imagination, but this isn't 2014 Florida State.
Right.
And their defense is missing a lot of their better players. And so that would be a situation. You've got Toledo after that. You've got Purdue after that. So you'd have 3 games where, a quarterback should be able to get right. And while I think Purdue is a dangerous team because of how good their offense is, their defense is a hot mess. At least it has been in recent seasons.
Yeah.
So I do think if Drew Pyne wins the job, that he'll get up to speed quickly. But the other thing about Drew Pyne is he's a really smart quarterback.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think really smart quarterbacks tend to make faster adjustments than guys who are really physically talented but are still learning the game.
Makes a lot of sense.
I mean, I've talked to sources, and I'm not talking about coaches, because coaches are going to be spin. I'm talking about former teammates of Drew Pyne's who would tell me off the record, or people that know them would tell me off the record, that Drew Pyne, from the minute he showed up on campus, impressed the heck out of his older teammates with his ability to pick up the offense. So I don't think his adjustment would be from a running the offense. It would be
just from an experience.
Which means this. This is what it means. It means getting used to the speed of a game.
Sure.
That's it. I mean, the reads, the all that stuff he would have down. He'd have the checks. You'd be able to run a lot of offense with Drew Pyne as your quarterback. You wouldn't have to dumb it down quite as much as you would for most freshman quarterbacks. Redshirt freshman quarterbacks, because he is a really smart quarterback.
Yeah.
The adjustment would be, okay, look, and anyone who's played football or coached football knows this. They say, well, you can't get ready for game speed, and you really can't, because the combination of, it's not just about the speed of players, but it's the intensity of the moment is really what that means. Look, players don't become 0.2 of a second faster in games than they do in practice. But the intensity and the tempo of the game is a lot different. You can't,
and everything surrounding the game. I mean, you got
that
the crowd
drill again. Hey, we made a mistake. Let's run that drill again. It's kind of like every play is like your one shot to go be effective on that particular play.
Yeah.
And that's really the difference. And, mentally your mind is going to speed up. You just are. And that's where younger guys have to learn to slow it down. And that would have been the adjustment for Drew Pyne. And it still might be the adjustment for Drew Pyne. He still look, he's an injury away or Jack Coan regressing away, which I don't think is going to happen, from being the starting quarterback.
Sure.
And I think that if it was a situation where no matter what Tyler Buchner has done from a talent standpoint, I still believe Drew Pyne right now is the number 2 quarterback.
I agree.
That could change, and we'll get into kind of what all this means as we get into the fall if everything kind of goes to plan. But right now, I would say Drew Pyne is the number 2 quarterback and is more of a threat to unseat Jack Coan than Tyler Buchner is.
Completely agree. And so you brought up the flavor of the year with Tyler Buchner.
You say that in kind of an insulting manner, but I mean, I'm
not. It's not that. You're right. I did say it in an insulting manner, but that was not my intention. My intention was that he's on the lips of everybody because he has the physical tools. He's the physical.
He's a special talent.
Yeah, he's the physical guy that you were talking about when you were saying, there's the cerebral guys that can pick up the playbook. And I'm not saying Tyler Buchner can't pick up the playbook. What I'm saying is, people get excited because of what he brings to the table from a physicality standpoint, what he can do with his arms.
He's that elite talent that people feel Notre Dame is missing to get over the hump.
Absolutely.
I just don't think he's going to be that guy in 2021.
It's unfortunate for Tyler Buchner that he did not get his senior season.
It's been a victim of circumstance in a lot of ways. He got injured in 2018. He had a brilliant.
Yes.
The kid accounted for 81 touchdowns in one season of football in 2019. And I don't care what level of competition you're going against. When you account for 81 touchdowns, you're special. I don't care what level. I don't care what your competition was. When you rush for over 1,600 yards and pass for over 400 yards and rack up a combined 81 touchdowns,
and didn't play most full games.
Right. You're special. And so I get it. I get why there's the hype around Tyler Buchner. What I have tried to tell people, and I wrote about this before the season, is Tyler Buchner is not your typical elite quarterback prospect because of the circumstances in which we've talked about. He's played 1 year of football in the last 3 years. And
if he played his senior year, I feel like his stock would be through the roof.
We'd be having a different conversation.
Yeah.
Yes. We'd be having a different I think he'd be in better position to go, because he also was going to transfer to a bigger school. He's going to transfer to Helix.
Yes.
In San Diego, and would have faced even tougher competition. And I think he would have been even further ahead of the game had he stayed in, then there was the debate of, okay, should he have stayed in California as a senior, not been an early enrollee and played football? I don't know if that would have benefited him as much as being in the Notre Dame offense and running the offense.
If there was no such thing as spring practice, then go play. But having the chance to get a jump start on what you're going to be doing for the next 4 years or however many it happens to be, I think that was absolutely. I think that's a no-brainer personally, because you can get those live reps.
And there's a comment that was made to me on one of the Facebook groups that I post my stories in. And you can always, if you haven't joined our Facebook group, please do so. You can search it. It's the I'm going to pull up the exact name right now, but if you just type in, it's Irish Breakdown Notre Dame Fighting Irish Super Fan Group. So come join our deal. It's a bit of a tongue twister. I also post stories at Notre Dame Football News, so you can engage in both of those. But the thing for me is, Vince, is I had a comment. Somebody said, well, Kelly needs to play the most talented quarterback. And I said, well, the most talented quarterback isn't always your best quarterback. And I think that is very true in this season. And what I mean by that is there should be no debate that Tyler Buchner is Notre Dame's most physically gifted quarterback. And at some point in time, my hope is that he takes over the offense and he leads Notre Dame to a championship. I think he has that kind of ability. But what people have to understand is being the most talented quarterback right now in 2021 doesn't mean you're the best quarterback. You have to be able to effectively run the offense. You have to be able to make the right checks, get the ball out. And I definitely don't want a true freshman quarterback playing behind an inexperienced offensive line. Now, that you can say, well, he's athletic, he can do all that. That's fine, but I'd rather have a guy that can quickly get the ball out than a guy that's going to have to scramble around and
I don't want when you're a redshirt or when you're a freshman, when you're a first-time player, and you have the ability to escape and use your legs and sometimes that, and when you have an inexperienced offensive line in front of you, sometimes that becomes the first thought is I got to get out of here.
And you can get into some bad habits, in my opinion.
That's exactly right. And not to bang on Ian Book, but there were times where I felt like that was the case. It was, I need to get out of here right now, when it was kind of like seeing ghosts.
I was watching film with a buddy today, came over to the house, and we were breaking down some all-22 film. And, we were watching a play against Georgia in 2019 where, he read to the right, Chase Claypool was covered. And, he just has to come back to his inside read and just bang a 3rd and 11 to Cole Kmet, who's wide open over the middle of the field. But as soon as that first read wasn't open, he looks down and he's looking to scramble, right? And that's fine. It made some plays. He did some big-time plays that way, but it also can be problematic. And to me, with Tyler Buchner, if you throw him in there too early, then you could force him into kind of reverting into that.
And that becomes kind of ingrained, and that's tough to get guys out of.
Yeah, the other part too is that Tyler's a very talented player. He's a very smart player. We saw some things from him this spring that showed me he's got the tools we wanted. The first throw that he made in the spring game was super impressive to me. It wasn't physically impressive, like he threw a 45-yard in cut on a dime after scrambling around and rolling to his left. It was a simple corner route, but you watch the play and he's cocking back and throwing. We showed it in the post-game podcast. He's cocking back and throwing it and letting it loose as Mitchell Evans is getting to the top of his drop. He's throwing a seam route to Lawrence Keys, dropping it right over the linebackers, but with enough zip to get it in front of the safeties. He showed to me that he has the instincts in the field. He's not just some athlete that's trying to play quarterback. Right. He's a quarterback, but at the same time, because of the talent that's also on the roster, they don't need to rush him.
Right.
And what I've tried to say to fans is Tyler Buchner is the future quarterback at Notre Dame. There's no doubt about that.
Absolutely.
But he's not Trevor Lawrence, who played 4 seasons of varsity football, led his team to state title games and all that. He's not Phil Dracovic, who played 3 full years at Pyne Richland and started as a sophomore and then started as a junior and then as a senior led his team to a state championship. Phil Dracovic played more games in 1 year than Tyler Buchner played his whole high school varsity career. And the reason I'm saying that is because that experience matters. And we have to understand that just because Tyler isn't ready right now doesn't mean he's not a great talent, doesn't mean he won't eventually be ready. He's also a player, however, Vince, kind of like Drew Pyne, maybe even more so, is I'm curious to see how the 15 practices develops him come the fall.
Sure.
Because I think, people have asked, why did they take the what does it mean that they took the red jersey off of him in the spring game? And what to me it meant was he's further along than maybe we thought he would be.
Yeah.
And they're trying to find a role for him. And there's times in the past I wish they would have taken the red jersey off of certain quarterbacks. And I'm glad they did it. But we got to see Tyler playing in a situation where, hey, buddy, we're not blowing this whistle dead. You gotta go ball. You gotta play. You gotta take a hit if you have to.
Well, I think it's everything you just said, and I agree totally with all of that and why they took it off. And I think another reason that they took it off is they have a lot of faith in the other 2 guys as well. And I'm not saying they're going out in the blue gold game trying to get guys hurt. That's not what I'm saying. But you can take that chance when you've got Coan and Pyne.
Yeah,
I think there's a little bit of that because
maybe
if they didn't have those guys, they're not taking that red. They're not taking that red jersey off.
Maybe, yeah. Probably right. But I think for me the focus is more on, boy, this kid can play, and this kid's a playmaker, and we got to give him a chance to do that. And he's different. He's different than the other guys we have, not just from a upside standpoint, but he brings a completely different skill set.
Sure,
you're not going to be doing a whole lot of called runs with Jack Coan and Drew Pyne. You will with Tyler Buchner.
I agree.
That's where, as we kind of dive into this, but see here, and this is where it gets tricky. And we had a question about this, that, how do you, if Jack Coan's a starter, okay, then what? So for me, my hope, if you want to know
I've got an opinion, yeah,
and I guarantee it's going to be the same as mine because
probably
it's a smart idea by you. But what you do is you got to hope that Tyler Buchner in the fall camp says, I'm too good not to play. And so what I hope that means is when we get into the fall, whoever wins the starting job, if it's Jack Coan, if it's Drew Pyne, one of those two guys, I'm going to assume it's Jack Coan, so we're going to talk about Jack Coan. Jack Coan wins the starting quarterback job. He's your guy. Tyler Buchner is going to have a role similar to what Ian Book had at the beginning of the 2018 season. He's your red zone guy, your short yardage guy. Maybe against teams like Toledo or Purdue, you throw him in there in the fourth series or third series and say, hey, let's go tempo. Let's do a couple things and throw the defense off and give him some live action.
Sure.
Maybe you do that in those games. You won't do it against Wisconsin. You won't do it against USC or North Carolina, but you could do it against Toledo. You could do it against Navy. You could do it against Georgia Tech, teams like that. And so Purdue would be another one. And so he's so good that you have to find a role for him. And then that's where he gets his playing time. Early in the season, however, when you jump up on Toledo big, I don't want Tyler Buchner to be the quarterback that they bring in. I want Drew Pyne to be the quarterback they bring in. Because I still believe if Tyler Buchner proves to be that I have to get on the field and play guy, that doesn't mean that he is then ready to be your quarterback every single down should something happen to Jack Coan. I still think you're grooming Drew White to be that guy in 2021. Then you let those two kids battle it out in the spring. That's to me the best way to handle, in my opinion, the quarterback depth chart going into 2020. And hopefully they can have enough success in the first 3 games that you can whoop up on some teams and have some convincing victories and be able to get all 3 of those guys some legitimate snaps.
Yeah, so basically Coan is your starter, Pyne is your backup, but Buchner has a role. And that role doesn't change if Coan goes down and Pyne goes in. He still has that role. It just one of the two guys takes over for each other, but Buchner still has that role. Like I agree with you. I think that's exactly how I would play it as well. He's not your typical third string quarterback. He is going to be 2B, for example. I mean, and Pyne is the guy that goes in for mop up duty. He's the guy that goes in.
But you got to let him play. That's the thing, though.
I agree.
When Pyne gets in the game, you got to let him play.
And Notre Dame has struggled with that in the past. When they put somebody in for mop-up duty, number one, it's been too late. And number two, it's just been to hand off, which you or I could do. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like that doesn't do anybody any good.
I felt early in 2019 they did a better job with that. When they had Phil Dracovic, I felt like early on in 2020 they allowed him to kind of come in and play, and I thought he played really well. And I'd like to see them do that. I'd like to see them do that more this year. I mean, when you go back and look at Phil, I mean, he threw 2 balls against New Mexico, but then Brendan Clark came in, and we'll get to him in a minute. He threw some passes. Phil threw 7 passes against Bowling Green. Like, I would love to see a situation like that where the backup quarterback gets in and throws 6-7 passes. We're not talking about airing it out every snap, but let him run the offense.
Well, no, run the offense. There's a difference. Run the offense. Don't
so
just
that's what
hand the ball.
That's what I'd like to see from them this year. And I think that it would be good to get all those guys some opportunity. But at the end of the day, I think it's clear that barring him just not progressing, to me, Brendan Clark, Tyler Buchner showed this spring that the hype is real from a physical tool standpoint. He's just going to need some time to develop the full grasp of the offense, and then running it against. Look, with all due respect, there's a big difference between the defense he faced in the fourth quarter of the Blue Gold game and every defense he'd face in a real game situation.
Absolutely,
it's a whole different situation. Just with all due respect, you go look at the personnel on the field.
Is what it is.
It's freshmen, young guys, walk-ons, guys that are third stringers and stuff, and it's just a different animal. So we have to understand that there needs to be some patience with Tyler Buchner, but at the same time, I think Tyler Buchner is talented enough to where you also, if you're Notre Dame, you have to force the issue to a degree and find a role for him. And so then you ask the question, well, where does that leave Brendan Clark? And honestly,
good question.
Right now, I think Brendan Clark's opportunity to be a starter at Notre Dame contending for a starting job is over.
Yeah. And it's nothing that he did wrong. It's injuries. Injuries got him. And, we don't even know the status of Brendan Clark from an injury standpoint.
He was throwing He was
Okay.
throwing at the end of the spring, but it was just stationary throwing. He wasn't
Yeah.
doing drops. He should be good to go by the fall.
Okay.
But again, the problem with Brendan Clark being able to overcome an injury is he was a guy that still needed a lot of work. He's still a very raw player physically.
Yeah.
I mean,
Had a cannon.
mechanically,
He's got a cannon
great
for an
arm,
arm.
very athletic. I mean,
Yes.
he's more Tyler Buchner than he is Jack Coan or Drew Pyne.
Absolutely.
I mean, I would argue that physical talent, he's the second most physically talented quarterback on the roster. I mean, he has the strongest arm of any of the quarterbacks, and he's an athletic kid. He's not as athletic as Tyler Buchner, in my opinion. But physical talent, he's got tools. But the problem is he was so raw, and we've talked about this in the past. Reading defenses was something that was still kind of foreign to him. Being on time, anticipation, all those things that we've praised Jack Coan and Drew Pyne and even Tyler Buchner for were things that Brendan needed a lot of work with. And he was not someone who could afford to miss an entire spring and an entire offseason with the talent you have.
Fall too.
Right.
I mean,
he missed
those were all
portions of it.
opportunities.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so he's someone who couldn't afford to do that. Now, Drew Pyne could have suffered an injury this past year and been out and still been able to kind of come back in the fall and pick things up quickly. I don't think Brendan Clark is in that situation. And it's an unfortunate, and I feel for the kid because everything I've heard is he's a really good kid and he works hard and all that. But when you have talent at a position, and Notre Dame does have talent at quarterback, I think the talent at quarterback for Notre Dame is very underrated by a lot of its own fans because they don't see there's no Trevor Lawrence, right? And because there's basically two Mac Jones type players ahead of him. And no one was talking about Mac Jones being a Heisman contender and number 15 overall draft pick coming the season because he's not 6'6" or 6'5" and 230 and big arm and athletic and all that. And that's kind of what these two kids are dealing with. But they're really good football players. And Brendan Clark is a really talented football player, but he was a very inexperienced, raw, mechanically football player.
He was a project, right? I mean, because he was kind of a tweener when meaning from a
style of play.
Yeah, and also they had a pretty good guy in Phil Jakovic, and then they had a pretty good guy in Drew Pyne. He was kind of like the in-between guy. You know what I mean? He was a project, and I'm sure that was explained to him to a degree when they brought him in. I mean, coaches are usually pretty on top of that.
I mean, kids know. I mean, if you're not smart enough to know that Notre Dame's going to be recruiting really good quarterbacks after you, then you're not smart enough to play at Notre Dame.
Right.
Brendan Clark knew what he was. I mean, I'm trying to remember correctly, but yeah, I mean, he knew that there was going to be competition.
And he was coming in behind Phil too, and Phil was pretty highly regarded when he came in.
Right, exactly. So, I mean, it's just a situation where, Brendan knew what he was getting into, and he accepted the challenge, and I respect that. I
absolutely respect that. Absolutely.
Yeah, so,
and I'm looking at this
now. He actually committed to Notre Dame after Drew Pyne.
Mm-hmm. That's what I was saying. That's what I thought.
Even though he was a year ahead of Drew Pyne
in
class.
He was slipping in right between.
Because remember, Notre Dame had originally got Cade McNamara in that class, who's now at Michigan. He decommitted, and they got Brendan Clark in July of 2018. He actually committed on July 4th, same day as Cam Hart. Well, Drew Pyne committed in April of that year. So when he committed, they already had Phil Jakovic on the roster, and Drew Pyne committed.
Correct.
So he knew what he was getting into, but at the same time, it's just a situation where you cannot afford – a kid like him can't afford to miss time. And the fact that he has missed time, he's going to have to just be brilliant and lights out in the fall to have a chance because it's almost impossible to really develop 4 quarterbacks at a time. You have to start when you get the fall.
That many reps.
The spring is the time for that, and he missed that.
Yep.
When you get into the fall, it's even the first day of camp. It's about development, but you're developing to get ready to play a game in a month.
And if they do what we hope that they do with the 3 guys, then obviously none of those 3 guys are going to be scout team. Right. Because normally the 3rd guy is scout team. Well, I don't think that's going to be the case.
Right.
At least I hope that's not the case.
I don't see Tyler Buchner running scout team.
That's what I'm saying. So you're either going to have Ronnie Paulus, the 3rd, running scout team, or you're going to have Brendan Clark running the scout team.
Yeah, and Cole Copen, the walk-on kid.
And those are 2 – and Brendan Clark and Paulus are 2 completely different styles of quarterback. So having both of those guys down there, they could mimic 2 different styles of quarterback. You know what I mean?
Kind of big arms.
They both have big arms, but Paulus is a statue. I mean, he's not going anywhere athletically, and Brendan Clark can use his legs. That's what I was getting at. But
I get you. But what I'm saying is they both have strong enough arms to where they can give you a
look.
pass game look.
Yeah, they can give you a look. Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah.
So obviously we're not really going to talk about Ronnie Paulus III. He's on the roster, but he will be. I mean, he's going to be a scout team guy. It is what it is. So
he's for depth.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So
I don't mean to disrespect by that. But
well, it just is what it is.
There's a huge gap in talent between Ron Paulus Jr. and everybody else. We just or Ron Paulus. Is he in the third?
He's the third.
It's Ron Paulus the third.
Yeah, he's a trace.
Yeah, because the talent gap between Ron Paulus Jr. was not significant because Ron Paulus Jr. I've always felt was a very talented quarterback in the wrong offense. I think if Ron Paulus Jr. would have played under what Brian Kelly's doing or what Charlie Weiss is doing, he'd have had a really good Notre Dame career.
Sure.
But yeah, Ronnie Paulus III is just, he's a guy that should be at a MAC school or something like that.
And he had a couple of MAC offers, and then they kind of backed off after COVID and all that. So he's on the roster. He's got a scholarship. Good for him. But he's a scout team guy.
You got a little frustrated. Like you've had a couple snappy little comments today, Vince. You've had a bad day. I'm a little fired up today, ma'am.
He played for a school that I don't like.
Oh, that's right.
What can I say? It also happens to be the school where my kid is going to go. So what can I say about that?
I know, right? I was thinking, I was like, you don't like it. Like, you and I live in the same neighborhood. I think the school district's probably the same too. Yeah,
my life is one just contradiction after another.
So to me, Vince, we kind of head into the summer with some questions still remaining, but they're more questions of certainty as opposed to questions of will they be good or not. We still need to figure out who the starter is. And we still need to know what the role for Buchner is going to be and how they're going to handle the depth chart. But to me, those are all positive questions because it's kind of like, boy, you have three really good options. How do you handle them all?
Right.
How are you going to deal with them all?
An embarrassment of riches, if you will.
I think that's where they are. And so that was not necessarily the case coming into the spring. So as I've said many times, and I'll continue to say, quarterback is, to me, not going to be the reason Notre Dame isn't successful this year. If for some reason that's what happens, to me, they have a quarterback situation that puts them in position to be successful offensively. If they're coached right, if they're game planned correctly, if the guys around them play well, I think the quarterback position is in really, really good shape. Maybe they don't have a first-round quarterback on the roster, at least not a first-round draft pick when we get to next April's draft.
Right.
But, I think Jack Coan is going to surprise some people this year.
You know what?
I've convinced you he's going to be a baller, so I'm pretty sure that I can convince some other people, hopefully.
Well, look, with the value that the NFL places on quarterbacks, he could easily be a day two guy. Second, third round, easily. If he puts up the numbers that I kind of anticipate him putting up, and then Notre Dame's in the conversation that they should be in, he could very easily be a day two guy. And I'm not saying he's going to sneak into day one, but
if Kyle Trask can be a second round pick,
that's what I'm saying.
There's not a lot of difference in talent between Kyle Trask.
That's what I'm saying. And Florida did not have the season that Notre Dame is going to have. So,
they played in the SEC championship, so I'm going to somewhat disagree with you on that. And I think the thing that Kyle Trask had working for him, however, is he put up monster numbers last year. He threw for over 4,000 yards and 40 touchdowns. I don't think Jack Coan's going to have that kind of production. But I do think Jack Coan's going to have very good production this year at Notre Dame. I do. Yeah. And look, and I'm going to have an article on this. We'll actually probably do a podcast on this somewhat soon, Vince. But when you look at the defenses that Notre Dame is going to face this year, and you just look at what they were last year, there's not a whole lot of Alabamas and Georgias and Clemsons on the defense on the schedule this year defensively. So that's going to factor into it as well, into what we expect. So that's kind of our look at the quarterback depth chart. We're both very high on it. We're both very excited about what it can do.
About it. Really,
and I think it's the perfect time for a philosophical shift because I think this shift is going to play right into the talents of the quarterback specifically. So Vince, let's go. Let's dive into some questions, man. Let's finish things off with some questions.
I'm going to start up at the top, Brian, and the news of the day, which you also have at irishbreakdown.com. Jay writes in, Brian, could you talk about the newly offered DB graduate transfer out of Tulsa and what you think about the staff going after him in the portal?
So first and foremost, as far as what I think about him, I would encourage you. I'm actually going to put it in the chat right now. So if y'all are in the chat, you can go see the link. I'm going to put the link that I did today. I got some all-22 film of him yesterday, broke down 3 games of him from the 2020 season. And I liked what I saw. He played primarily field in their base defense, but there's so many tempo teams in the ACC that he had opportunities to play both. Notre Dame is looking at him as a field cornerback, which is the position that Clarence Lewis and Tariq Bracy played. He's incredibly long. He's 6'2". He has a lot of experience playing press coverage and man coverage, which I think is attractive to Notre Dame because I think that he fits this defense extremely well because of his ability to play man defense. And you look at his numbers in his career, his production is outstanding. So according to Pro Football Focus, in 27 games, he's given up 42 receptions for 490 yards. If you look at last year, for example, Nick McLeod, that 490 yards came on 571 pass snaps. Last year, Nick McLeod, Notre Dame's best cornerback, gave up 410 passing yards on 385 pass snaps. This kid has never given up more than 170 yards passing in a season. That's really, really good in a league that's known for passing.
Yeah.
He's got a lot of experience. He started 27 games, or he started 23 games. He's played in a lot more. He's played in, like I said, he's played in a lot of football games at Tulsa. He's got a lot of experience. He got injured in 2019. He played 3 games and then hurt his shoulder. He had another minor injury the year before that cost him some games. So that's a bit of a concern for me, is that he has missed time, but he was healthy this year. And he's a very good run defender, got long arms, good at block destruction. He's not really a guy that makes a lot of plays on the ball. He's more of a – he's put it like this. He's more Troy Pride than he is Julian Love. And if you remember Troy Pride didn't make a lot of plays on the ball. What made Troy Pride so good is you just never threw on him because he had guys covered so well.
He was always right there, yeah.
Right, and so that's something I saw from this kid. And look, he's played against 5 Power 5 teams in his career. He played against Mississippi State in a bowl game. He played against I'm trying to think of the teams he played against. This year he played against Oklahoma State. So he's had 2 games against Oklahoma State, a very powerful offense. He played against Texas, Mississippi State, and then there was one other Power 5 game that he played against. And his numbers in those 5 Power 5 games, he's given up 7 completions for like 45 yards in those 5 games. Against Texas, 2 games against Oklahoma State, Mississippi State, and then there's one other. I'm trying to remember the other team that he played against. So this is a kid that's productive.
Yeah.
He's not a burner, but he makes up for it with really good length. He's a guy that he doesn't have a single interception in his career, which I find fascinating. But a big part of that is his teams just don't throw at him. I watched one of the games I broke down last night was Oklahoma State. And Vince, there's probably 10 or 12 times where he's isolated on a receiver and the quarterback looks right at him and says, nope, and goes somewhere else. I mean, and quickly. And Oklahoma State has NFL wide receivers on their football team.
Well, how do you think that this, David wants to know, isn't offering this kind of a slap in the face of the corners already on the roster?
No,
we talked about this a little bit.
Yeah,
we talked about this a little bit in another podcast about how, you got to know the room. You've got to know the room that you're bringing this guy into. Is he going to be a good fit? But coaches and players, they want to get better. Like coaches want to win. Yeah, coaches want the team to get better. And if this kid is going to make the team get better, it's going to be an easy, convincing job.
Here's the other thing that I like about this one, why I'm more interested in him than I am some other transfers, is because he has 2 years of eligibility left. Because he got a medical red shirt. He got a medical red shirt in 2019. 2020 was his 4th year. Well, 2019 and now 2020 don't count for him. So he still has 2 years of eligibility left.
Gotcha. Yeah,
that's another thing that kind of plays into that, because now it's like, well, what does that say about the room? Well, you guys better get better if you want to play.
Yeah.
That's what it says about the room. Look, you always have to be, we talked about this the other day. You have to be careful about how this is going to impact the rest of your roster. But at the same time, if you got a guy that can come in and make your team better, then you look at him. And you have to consider that this kid from Tulsa is someone that Marcus Freeman and Mike Mickens have seen on film a lot. They have watched this kid play because it's in Cincinnati's league. They've had a very good defense in that league. And so I think when you look at this, it's a situation where they know what this kid can do, and this kid fits their defense very well. Yeah. I mean, Cincinnati had the number 1 defense in the AAC this year. The number 2 defense was Tulsa. Cincinnati gave up 16.8 points per game. Tulsa gave up 21.6. The next closest defense was Memphis at 27.9. And Cincinnati gave up 9 fewer yards per play than Tulsa. And then Tulsa, they gave up 324.6. Tulsa gave up 333. The next closest team was Navy at 385. Cincinnati led the AAC in yards allowed per play. They only gave up 4.57. Tulsa gave up 4.7. The next closest one was 5.63. So they were right on the heels of Cincinnati in regards to being a really good defense in a scoring league. And this kid was a big part of it. There's a quote from Ryan Roberts in there. Ryan Roberts works for Coast to Coast Scouting. He's a guy that does NFL draft analysts. And I was talking to him, and he wrote in there that there were people around the Tulsa program that said at times this kid was their best defensive player. Well, that matters because they had this kid named Zaven Collins on their defense this year who
got drafted.
Was a first-round draft pick.
Yeah.
Got drafted ahead of Jeremiah Wusu-Koramoah. So this is a situation in which they're looking at him because he could potentially be not just an upgrade, but an upgrade. And he also fits the style of play that Marcus Freeman wants more, because we've talked about Clarence Lewis is a good football player. Clarence Lewis is not someone you're going to come up and ask to play press man all the time.
Right.
This kid can do that.
Right.
And this kid can do that as a field corner, which is harder to do because there's so much more room to work. So
gotcha.
That's what I think of a Caleb Evans. That's why I think that they offered him. And yet there's some concern because, to me, it's no different than bringing in a big-time recruit.
Right.
You're not going to recruit talented freshmen. You got to compete and you got to battle. And if those guys had played well enough to where they didn't think this kid could be an upgrade, they wouldn't be looking at him.
Right.
And so I think this helps. And then, he also has the flexibility. He could play the boundary if Cam Hart doesn't pan out. So I think that's part of it too. Is this kid can flat out play, and this coaching staff has a lot of firsthand experience with him. They know what he can do.
All right, my man Connor wants to know, who do you expect to be the best opposing quarterback among the regular season teams?
Sam Howell for me, for
That's
North
what
Carolina.
I was going to say. Yep, that was my
Keaton
answer too.
Slovis is going to be in that conversation. Desmond Ritter is going to be in that conversation.
Do you think Slovis is more the because of the offense that he's in?
A little bit. He got better to me as a sophomore. His arm strength took a jump. I watched no
USC games last year, so I
don't think, Vince, that he is a guy that to me I look at and say he's a playmaker with his leg. He's not. But he's really good in that offense. His arm strength took a jump up. He's to me is the second best quarterback that they're gonna. But the offense factors into that. If you have a guy that can really effectively run an offense, he's going to be productive. And Mac Jones is a perfect example.
Sure.
Mac Jones was the second highest drafted quarterback that Notre Dame faced this year. I think you and I would agree he wasn't the second most physically talented quarterback that Notre Dame faced this year.
Right.
So, but yeah, I would go with Sam Howell on that one for sure.
All right, Brian, I'm going to leave you with this one from Greg Marshall. I always hear people use the phrase "turn on the heat" on a recruit. What are some phrases coaches would use for this instead of a regular recruit call on a prospect?
I think it's just going through the process. That's it is. Turning up the heat is essentially meaning you have a shot to finish with this kid. You use that one of two situations. One is you have a chance to really you're in good position. You think you can close on the kid. You turn up the heat to try to get him in the room. Or, hey, we're trailing a couple schools. We got to turn up the heat.
Yep.
The way that they'll recruit a prospect, and Vince, I know you got to bounce. So if you got to roll,
I do.
Having this conversation.
I will talk to everybody tomorrow. Looking forward to it. And, we'll see you tomorrow. Thanks, guys.
So away, Greg, this is a good question. A way that Notre Dame and other schools will deal with recruits that maybe they don't necessarily want to commit right now, or they're not ready to fill out a position yet, is you just go through your process. You make these kids feel loved, you make them feel appreciated, but you don't have the conversations of, hey, here's where you fit. Turning up the heat is not just about volume. It's not just about having a lot of coaches involved. That's part of it. But the other part of the conversation is you start having the conversations about, hey, man, we really want you here. We think you could be a part of this class. What do you think? And you start really kind of putting it in their head about making a decision with a kid that you're not necessarily turning the heat up on, to use your expression, is, you love on him, you make him feel important, but at the same time say, hey, look, but we need to get you on campus first. We need to see here, you can use excuses now, like, hey, we haven't had a chance to see you work out yet. We want to meet you in person. We still have some academic stuff to do. You can kind of maybe hold up his applications with the admissions office for a little bit. There's all types of things you can do, or you could just be honest with the kid too and say, look, we love you, but right now we're not in a position to take your commitment. You want to be careful with that, because to some kids that's just going to equal you're not in the game anymore. So I think that's what you're asking. I hope that's what you were asking. If not, Greg, if that's not exactly what you're asking, please clarify what you're asking, and I'll address it. Brian Chesanik says, hey, Brian, love the hard work as usual. Thank you, Brian. Jack Coan should be QB1, but can you talk about how they might use everyone's favorite third stringer? And, we talked a little bit about this earlier, and we've talked about it before, Brian, but I think specifically for me, how I view this is allowing him to sort of have a role, a limited role in the offense. It can be short yardage. It can be red zone, to where you're going to take advantage of first his running ability in those situations, but also he has a pass game package. Maybe take 4 or 5 concepts. There's a couple quick game concepts that he likes. There's a couple, there's a drop back concept that he likes. There's a play action concept that he likes, maybe a bootleg concept that he likes. And then just a couple, then the RPOs can kind of be part of that too. We just take a couple concepts, and we saw him throw the smash concept really effectively in the blue gold game. Okay, so maybe you want to carry that one in. That's a pretty decent red zone package. Do some things where you get him on the run, where he has an offense that's kind of like the Tyler Buchner offense. It's a condensed version of what you do that's specific to him being a red zone short yardage type of quarterback. And so you allow him to master that. He knows what he's going to be getting into when he gets into the game. He knows this is what I have to execute. This is the situations that I find myself in, and he can go out and execute it. And I think they're high leverage enough situations, short yardage, sometimes could be third down. It could be red zone. You're putting him in high leverage situations, but you're also giving him a condensed enough package to where he's going to be able to master that package more effectively than he would the entire offense. That's what I would like to see from him. And now you may not do that every game. You may do that against Florida State. You may do that against Toledo and Purdue, but maybe you don't do that when you go play Wisconsin. So you have to also be smart about that, is knowing where he is in his development. Do you really want to put him into a situation where, a mistake could have the game on the line? That's what you have to factor into it. But with Ian Book in 2018, they put him in against Michigan in the red zone because, they had seen from the year before against LSU and some other situations that Ian was ready to run the offense. And that's why I kind of say that we've seen that script before, and I could see him doing that. Michael Johnson says, or asks, QBs being passive has been the problem with the passing game. I would like to see QB1 take a few chances in the passing game. That will open up the running game. And Michael, that's a great point. And that's why it is so important that the pass game not just be efficient, but also be explosive and be willing to take risks. Everything you do on a football field impacts another part of it. So if you're not effective throwing the quick game, short to underneath stuff, then it's going to make you less efficient, because you're going to be so reliant on downfield throws, which are lower completion, lower percentage, higher risk plays. If you're not effective or willing to throw the ball downfield, but you're really good throwing the short stuff, eventually teams are just going to start playing more aggressive systems and take that short stuff away and force you to beat them where you're not good. If you're really good running the ball, but not great throwing the ball, they're going to be able to play that. So, there's a ton of examples for that. And that's why I say the offense has always been like good at one or two of those things and not all those things. And this year they have to get good at all those things if they're going to take that next jump. Scheme and all that stuff is going to take you so far. There also has to be a level of execution involved in this as well. Tom McCartney says, tough situation. Pyne has done everything right. In my opinion, it doesn't matter who starts. The offense will run the same. Whoever takes care of the football the most will win the job. I hope that it's not that. I think that is what Notre Dame has been doing in recent years, and that has been something that has limited the offense. If the guy that's going to take care of the ball the most can't make plays, then sure, you're going to go beat Toledo, and you're going to beat Purdue, and you're going to beat Navy and Georgia Tech and teams like that, but you're not going to beat the best teams in your schedule. And if you are able to beat a schedule this year that doesn't have really any great teams on it, you're going to get to the postseason, you're going to get smacked in the mouth again. Because conservative take care of the football offense doesn't win championships anymore. Alabama won, 4 national championships running that offense, and they went away from it. Why? Because they understand you can't win 17-14 anymore against the big boys. You have to be able to score points. And yes, you need all your quarterbacks to take care of the football, but I want a guy that can make plays, much more so than I want a guy who takes care of the football. And I think that is a lot more important in this offense than I think some people are giving it credit for. Just taking care of the offense or football to me, in running the offense the same, is a recipe for what we've seen at Notre Dame, which is a really good team that can't beat the best teams on the schedule. Ian Book was good at those things, right? Ian Book went 30-5. Great, right? Ian Book went 5-5 against teams that finished in the top 25. That's it. Tony Rice had more wins over top 25 teams in 1 year, in 2019, than Ian Book had his whole career, more. And so you need a quarterback that can make plays if you want to change that. Brendan Manning says, I saw Pyne throw 2 times last season. It was on the numbers both times. I would love to see him run the offense. If his chance, I think they can all make plays. I really do. Wade Garrett says, hypothetical, if the QBs were evaluated similar by staff, would Kelly want to play Buchner considering he's done coaching in 2024, groom his best QB recruit as a coach at Notre Dame? I don't think Kelly looks at it that way. I think Coach Kelly's going to look at it and say, who's the quarterback that gives us the best chance in 2021? And that's who you need to start. I think the only time you start moving on to your future is if you're in a situation where you've lost a couple games. So I felt like in 2019, after the Michigan loss, that was the perfect time to get Phil Jakovic in the game because he was your most talented quarterback. Your season was lost, and you had, 5 or 6 games. You had an opportunity to get him in the game, develop him, and get him groomed to take over. But you don't do that to start a season, in my opinion. You should, who's the quarterback that gives us the best chance to win right now? That may be Tyler Buchner when it's all said and done. But right now, I don't think that's who it is. D-Rock asks, in the BK Notre Dame tenure, what are your thoughts on how much the offensive coaches give their QB the green light to change the play at the line? Passive play calling makes me feel as though it's not much. They used to do it a lot. When Tommy Rees was the quarterback at Notre Dame, he changed the plays a lot, partly because he was probably the smartest quarterback. I don't even think probably. I think it's pretty clear he was the smartest quarterback that Brian Kelly had. Tommy Rees did not have the success he had in Notre Dame because he had tremendous physical gifts. He had a tremendous physical gift right here, which is why I think he's made such a great coach he's got potential to be a great coach at Notre Dame. So they don't do a ton of it. And honestly, a lot of teams don't do that anymore. And that's why you run RPOs as much as you do, because it eliminates the need for the quarterback to constantly have to get you in and out of the right play. And what I mean by that is you can listen to any coach that runs a lot of RPOs. They'll say, look, the RPO is designed to make you right. So if you've got a run play called, let's say you're running buck sweep to your right, and you've got, so example of what a play we were watching today when I was telling you I was watching film with a friend of mine. We were watching a Georgia game. Notre Dame went trips into the boundary and had a receiver outside. Georgia overloaded the boundary formation, and Notre Dame had an outside zone run called. And so you say, okay, well, they've got us played well there. So do you check out of that, which then gives them an opportunity to – here's the thing. If the quarterback checks and the defense knows he's checking, then they can check out of it. Whereas if you run an RPO, you can just signal to the outside receiver, hey, this is the route I want in your isolation. Slant, glance, out, hitch, fade, whatever. And then you just snap the ball. Everybody else runs the run play, and then you can take that one-on-one. And so I think that, to me, is why RPOs are so much more effective now than having a quarterback just make a lot of audibles at the line of scrimmage. I also think it's a lot harder to do that nowadays. When you're on the road against Georgia, good luck trying to get all 10 other guys to know what play you just checked it to. Whereas if you can just give some sort of signal to one guy, everybody else is running whatever play you call, and you can give a signal to one guy to, hey, we're running this route against this look in this RPO. That, to me, is a lot more effective than having a quarterback that's going to do a lot of audibles. Let's get down here to some questions. Some conversations about Florida State. Tom McCartney says Florida State is still a tough place to play. They will always have athletes. Yeah, they have athletes. They just don't have a lot of really good football players. And look, I mean, I'm not trying to say that Florida State's a bunch of bums or Florida State's not that good or whatever the case may be. But, last year Florida State at home lost to Georgia Tech. They lost to Pittsburgh 41-17. They beat Duke and they beat North Carolina. I mean, I don't think that – look, a tough place to play is more about who you're playing than it is the place. I mean, that's just the reality. You look at Florida State at home the year before, they lost to Boise State at home. They barely beat Louisiana Monroe at home. They lost to Miami at home. I mean, a tough place to play is about how good the team is. And right now, I don't think Florida State's that good of a team. Their offensive line's a mess. I think from a matchup standpoint, I look at Florida State and say they're not strong in the areas where Notre Dame is strong. And where the areas where Florida State has some strengths are areas where Notre Dame has strengths. So I don't think there's anything that they can do to say, hey, you're going to just take advantage. It's to me, the only way it's a competitive game is if Notre Dame just doesn't play well. And I don't think they are not going to not play well because of anything Florida State does. It's just they're just not ready to play well. And I don't see that happening. Technical Technician, hit the like button, subscribe if you have not already. I appreciate that. Absolutely. Please do that. Jonathan here's a good one. If Tommy Rees was at this stage in his coaching development when Phil Jurkovec was still here, do you think they would have treated him similar to Tyler Buchner? I think so. Yeah, I think so. Now, again, that would have also included that Tommy recruited Phil Jurkovec, which he did not. And whether we want to admit it or not, that matters to some coaches. I'm not saying it matters to Tommy Rees, but it could. But if he would have been the one that recruited Phil Jurkovec and all that kind of stuff, then I think there would have been a little bit more investment in developing him for the future. John Climax says Phil felt like the red jersey held him back too. I am happy that they took Tyler's red jersey away for the blue gold game. I agree. Let's see here. Notre Dame 2164. I hope that they let Buchner run the actual offense when he gets in the game, not just hand the ball off over and over. I agree, no matter who the backup quarterback is. I think that's absolutely important. I think you need to be able to have a quarterback that can run the entire offense. Technical Technician asks, this is a very good question. Brian and Vincenzo, any inside info on how the other position players view the quarterback room? Like adults, young men can easily be swayed by emotions and alliances, friendships, etc. Culture be damned. I think from everything I've heard, there's a lot of confidence in all the quarterbacks. And I've talked to different people and I've talked to different sources, and they all say, well, this kid's really good and that kid's really good. And you always have your friendships and things along those lines. But I think one of the things that I was concerned about was Tyler Buchner Drew Pyne did such a great job earning the respect of his teammates in the fall, his first year at Notre Dame, that you wonder if Jack Coan beats him out, how's that going to play in the locker room? And this is to your question, and that's a legitimate concern. One of the things that I have heard, and Vince and I talked about this before spring started, is Jack Coan did a great job from the moment he got at Notre Dame at building relationships slowly and the right way. So not just walking in like, I'm Jack Coan, I'm Rose Bowl, but just like, hey, taking guys aside, building relationships off the field, and just putting in the work. And so from everything I've heard from multiple different types of sources is there's a lot of faith amongst the players that no matter who wins the starting quarterback job, they're going to be good. And so I don't think it's a situation where, to your point, 2016, the quarterback battle in 2016 divided the football team. And the fact that they chose Kaiser over Zaire divided the football team. I don't see that happening this year. So, it's a very fair question. I just don't think with this particular situation that it's going to have that kind of impact, because I think there's a great deal of respect for all the quarterbacks in the room. John, I don't really want to get into this one. How much better would you guys feel if Phil Jurkovec was still on the roster? I'm not going to get into that because there's going to be people that think things like this. I think Phil and Coan are same talent level. I don't think it's anywhere close to the talent level. And then there's James, who I tend to agree with. And look, Phil Jurkovec is a hot button topic for Notre Dame fans, and I feel like if I start talking about it, there's going to be 75,000 thumbs downs because there's some people that just can't handle conversation. And Tom, I'm not saying you're that way at all. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying in general. Dane Brugler, who's one of the best draft analysts, had a mock draft where he had Phil Jurkovec going in the first round, number 15 overall. Now, I don't think Phil Jurkovec's a first-round pick today, but I think if he continues to grow the way he did last year, he'll have a chance. And somebody said on Twitter, I'm shocked if Phil Jurkovic's a first-round draft pick. And my response was, well, the only people that are going to be shocked by that are Notre Dame fans, because they've convinced themselves that he's something that he's not. And, who knows, they're still holding on to the blue gold game. But the fact is Phil Jurkovic was really good last year at BC, despite having no spring ball, being in a brand new offense with brand new coaches, with completely brand new teammates. And I think he threw for over 300 yards in like 4 of his first 5 games. So, Phil's a very talented quarterback. The question that I've always had about him staying at Notre Dame was, would the Notre Dame coaches have have built the offense to fit his skill set? That was a bigger question mark. If they were willing to fit the offense around his skill set, I think we'd be looking at this season and saying, boy, this kid's going to be really, really good and really dynamic and really dominant. But that's just speculation. He is the quarterback at Boston College, and at the end of the day, that's really all that matters. But Phil Jurkovic would be the most physically talented quarterback on Notre Dame's roster if he was still at Notre Dame. And I don't know anyone outside of the Notre Dame fan base that would argue otherwise. I mean, I've talked to several NFL draft analysts and scouts, and they all say the same thing. Right now, he's at worst a second-round grade. So unless you think Jack Coan is right now a second-round grade, which I don't think many people do, Phil Jurkovic is clearly the most talented quarterback, would have been the most talented quarterback on the roster. We'll see how he does now as a senior at Boston College. Michael Morris asked, don't you think that if our offense could be top 25, our defense, with our defense, we can be real good? I think they need to be better than that, to be honest with you, Michael. I mean, if you look at the offense last year, they weren't too far off of that last year. I mean, they've been sort of a top 25 offense in recent years. Last year, they were 30th in scoring offense. Notre Dame was 26 in total offense. So, I mean, they were close to being a top 25 offense. I think they need to be a top 15 offense in scoring and in yards per play. And then from an efficiency standpoint, when you take their production relative to their opposition. And part of the reason I say that is just number one, generally speaking, Michael, you need to have a more dynamic offense to win. I think when you look at the teams that are competing for titles and winning titles, last year Ohio State was 11th in scoring. Alabama was 2nd. Those are the 2 teams that played for the title. The year before that, the 4 playoff teams, when you look at the teams that made the playoff in 2019, they finished 1st, 3rd, 4th, and 6th in scoring offense. In 2018, you had the playoff teams were 1st, 3rd, 4th, and then all the way down to Notre Dame, who was trying to find Notre Dame. They're not even on the screen right now in scoring offense. Notre Dame finished 42nd. Well, Notre Dame looked a lot different than number 1, number 3, number 4, and then they get to the playoff and they scored 3 points. So you have to be a top 15 offense, in my opinion, even with a really good defense, because Clemson had really good defenses during that stretch. Alabama had really good defenses during that stretch, and they still gave up points in the postseason because you're playing against elite offenses. So I think they need to be more of a top 15 unit with the defense being as good as we expect it to be for them to really compete. If we're talking about playing for a championship. Now, if we're talking about, to your point, Michael, if we're talking about going 10-2, then yeah, okay, 10-2, top 25 means you're going to be 10-2 again. But I think we're at the point now where Brian Kelly's done such a great job at Notre Dame that 10-2 is now the floor. That should not be a, hey, 10-2, great job, you're wonderful, Hall of Fame. 10-2 is like, all right, okay, what are you going to do to get to the next level? And to me, that's what requires them to take that next step, in my opinion. John A1, Notre Dame already has a deep playbook. How many packages can be added within reason for Buchner or Davis in a Wildcat? I think it's simple. I mean, look, you're not creating more plays, John. You're just taking aspects of the offense that you run and saying, hey, we're going to utilize that in these situations. So let's take Avery Davis, for example. We've seen Notre Dame in past years. They have designed runs to the quarterback. They've run outside zone with the quarterback as the runner and the running back as the lead blocker. We've seen him do that. We saw him do it last year against Alabama. We saw him do it against Iowa State in the bowl game. There's been other games we've seen him do that. Those are just the 2 that jump off top of my head. We know that they have read zone as part of the offense. We know that they have power read as part of the offense. We've seen them run it. It's just in those situations, you practice those plays more in those situations than you would in your normal base offense. So it's not about adding to the offense. It's actually about condensing it. And in this situation, this is our package. And this is kind of what Coach Reese alluded to when we were the last time we got a chance to interview him, is he was talking about how I called all these plays, and you practice all these plays, and then you get to games and we only lose like 7 of them. Well, what I took out of that conversation is he's looking at saying, hey, look, we don't need to take 20 third down plays into a game when on average we only run 7. We need to find our best 10 pass plays and be prepared to execute them at a higher level. So less offense, more efficiency and effectiveness and expertise within that offense. I think that's a great strategy. And that's one of the things when he said that, it gave me even more confidence he's going to be able to get the job done this year, because it shows me that he understands that the trends that we're seeing in college football is, hey, less offense, higher effectiveness with what you do. And then with what you do, doing it out of different looks, which makes it more complicated for the defense to defend, but is much easier for your players to run. Technical technician Phil, but moved, but will end up being a first-round pick. Mark it down. Also said, James, you are correct. Dracovic was incredible with a horrific run game and offensive line. Joe Mama, love this name. Love from Ireland. Appreciate you. Obviously, my heritage is Irish heritage, so I appreciate you. There's one of the one things that was the biggest bummer about the 2020 season was my wife and I didn't get a chance to go to Ireland. We were very much looking forward to that, because me, like an idiot, when Notre Dame was scheduled to go to Ireland in 2012, I decided to stop covering the team and get back into coaching. So I missed that opportunity like a moron, and we were hoping to be able to do that. So we're hoping we'll get a chance to do that again. Delali, is redshirting a player an easier or harder decision now versus previous years? I think it's a lot harder. I do. And I think this is something that you have to start having these conversations with guys before they get on campus so that you prepare them for it. And you're going to know which players are okay with that, which players aren't. And I'll share a story with you. There was an offensive lineman at Notre Dame recently who ended up being drafted in the NFL, was a multi-year starter, very talented player. And one of the reasons he picked Notre Dame over another big-time program is the other big-time program said, hey, we're going to start you as a freshman. And his thing was, I'm not going to be ready to start as a freshman. And because Coach Heastan had done such a good job of explaining to him why he needed to come to Notre Dame and redshirt and develop and all those and the benefits of it, that when another school said, hey, you're going to play as a freshman, he's like, I'm not ready to play as a freshman. But that's because of the relationship that he had built with the Notre Dame coaches. And so I think that's a big part of it, is as long as you're honest with kids, hey, look, we're not promising you playing time. We're not going to tell you you're going to come in and play as a freshman unless you're going to stick to that. And so I think that's a big part of it. But, yeah, you have to really sit down and decide, okay, can we afford to redshirt this guy? I hope that this alters Notre Dame's redshirt strategy, because I just don't feel like redshirting certain positions really makes a lot of sense in most situations. There are times and places I don't really think there's a point in redshirting wide receivers ever. But in an example like Kendall Abdur-Rahman, I would have redshirted him because he's someone who was making a position change and he needed that year of development to make the adjustment where he didn't burn a year of eligibility when he still didn't really know what he was doing. If a guy's not physically ready to play, you redshirt him. But those are conversations I think you need to have. At most positions, I would never redshirt a running back. I don't think there was any value in redshirting Kyren Williams. You're going to be lucky to get him for a 4th year, much less a 5th. Is just not going to happen. They couldn't even convince Tony Jones Jr. to come back for a 5th year as a running back. So why would you ever redshirt a running back? Just play him. Now, offensive line, different story. Linebacker, defensive lineman, different story. Skill positions, different, are positions where I just don't think you should want a redshirt. All right, it's got some more love from Ireland. Appreciate y'all being part of the show. Irish football player from Dublin, play for the Meath Bulldogs. So welcome to the channel. I appreciate all of you being a part of it. Scott says, does Coach Kelly ever have the question posed to him about playing freshman receivers? Yes, he does. Xavier Watts is a must get on the field this year. I agree with your second point, but look, we've asked him that question before, and at the point now where we already know what his answer is going to be, and I hate to say it, but just there's no point in asking him anymore because he's just going to keep saying the same thing. Joel Easton says, can you explain the tight ends role in RPOs? Do they have a role as a receivers, or is it strictly a QB, RB, wide receiver activity? Well, Joel, it depends. It depends on the play. If they are part of the run blocking part of the play, then their role is going to be as a run blocker. So here's an example. So let's say Notre Dame lines up in a position where they've got the tight end attached to the line of scrimmage. So he's lined up, in a 3-point stance, lined up right outside the tackle, and he's blocking the backside of an outside zone play. Well, you're going to run the outside zone. He's blocking backside of the zone because in an RPO, the line and the running back and the tight end are all blocking for that play. If he is detached and let's say he's out in the slot or he's outside, then he'll be part of the pass concept. Now, we've seen that before. I can think of a particular play against Virginia Tech, and I believe there's also one against Northwestern in 2018 when Notre Dame ran an RPO with Cole Kmet in the slot. They threw him a bubble screen on like 3rd and 7. He caught it and ran for first down. So he was a receiver as part of the RPO. So it just depends on the play. And is he tagged as part of the pass concept or is he tagged as part of the run concept? And so that'll change. It won't be like a play action where, you're showing run and then he's going to release. He's either going to execute part of the run play as an attached player, maybe from a wing or a fullback position, or if he's detached and outside, he'll be part of the pass concept. Richard Robinson, great discussion as always. I believe Coan should start based on experience in big games. That being said, backup QB needs meaningful game reps. I think Buchner will be backup based on film. I think Tyler Buchner could eventually be that, but I think right now, this is just my opinion, Richard. I respect yours, but my opinion, I still think Drew Pyne is the number 2 quarterback. Tyler Buchner's a guy that in my opinion is still emerging. I don't know, because here's let me explain the difference. I think Tyler Buchner's already good enough to have a role, to have a package where his talent and his unique skill set is so good that you need to get him on the field. But that doesn't mean if something were to happen to Jack Coan, let's say Jack Coan injures his foot again in the second game of the year, he's going to be out for a month. I don't think Tyler Buchner is the person that you would come in and play the next 4 games as your every down quarterback. I think you'd slide Drew Pyne into that role. So technically Drew Pyne is the backup quarterback, even though in my scenario, Tyler Buchner would likely get more reps because it's about who can run the entire offense and go win us games. And today, May 18th, Tyler Buchner's not there yet. Now, could that change by the time we get to September 5th? Absolutely. Tyler Buchner's really good. It's just as of today, that's how I see it. But it's a good question. I appreciate your comment on that. Sean McArdle says, are you comfortable that Buchner's arm mechanics are now where they should be, and what kind of ultimate arm talent do you think he has? Not quite there yet, Sean. He has come a long way from – so, like, I didn't have a problem with his mechanics in high school, and then he changed them, and I hated the new mechanics he had, and now he's kind of an in-between phase. For the most part, it doesn't impact him, but there are still times I've seen it in practice clips that have been public. I've seen it in some private practice clips, and we saw it in the blue gold game where the altered throwing motion at times and his footwork at times causes him to lose velocity when he throws down the field. We saw that on the throw he had he threw a corner route really short in the game. He underthrew a corner route big time. And then he underthrew that deep ball to Braden Lindsey. Yeah, it worked against a walk-on corner, but I think we should all be able to agree that if you're doing that against a Power 5 team on a Saturday, it's probably not going to work as effectively. So there still needs to be – now, when he can just wind up and throw deep, those are great deep ball. But when he has to kind of quickly get a ball downfield beyond 25, 30 yards, he doesn't get the same power on it that he used to get, and that's because of the arm mechanics. So there's still some tinkering that needs to be done to get him in that position, but he's a lot further along. And then ultimately what kind of arm talent he's had, I think he has elite arm talent. He doesn't have the Justin Fields, Trevor Lawrence bazooka for an arm, but he's got a really quick release. He can get the ball downfield. He throws the ball with a lot of velocity, 25 yards and in. If he can improve his consistency throwing the ball downfield when he can't, really set up and let it, because when he sets up and lets it go, we saw this from some of the practice clips. When he's in the pocket in 1-on-1s and 7-on-7s, where he's able to kind of to coil up and let it go, he can launch it downfield. What the situations I'm referring to are game situations where you kind of got to quickly set your feet and get that throw out quickly. And that's where I thought Tyler had some issues getting the kind of velocity and power on the downfield throws that he did before all these changes have happened. Notre Dame 2164, you may have answered this in the past, but I don't believe a quarterback has to have a huge arm to be a good deep ball passer. What do you think? I agree wholeheartedly. And if someone disagrees with you, here's your response. If someone says, no, that's not true, just say, okay, Mac Jones. Then they'll come back and say, Mac Jones. Just keep saying Mac Jones. And then just say, and that's a great example because Mac Jones is a really good deep ball thrower. He's got an average arm, in my opinion. But he was a very, very good deep ball thrower because it's about timing, it's about accuracy, it's about ball placement. If you wait until the ball has to go 60 yards to get a deep ball out, then you're going to need arm strength. If you're smart and you can read the defense quickly and you know that that's where the ball's going to go, and you get it out and it only has to go 45, then that's all the arm that you need. Nick Thomani says, since you have been covering Notre Dame, who has been the biggest QB that got away on the recruiting front? That is a good question. Guy that got away. That's a tough one. I have to think, because I think Notre Dame's gotten a lot of their top quarterbacks. I think there was a 2016, the year that they got, it's 2017, the year that they got Avery Davis. There was a couple quarterbacks, and I'm trying to remember correctly that who they offered that year is the year that they got Avery Davis. There was a couple quarterbacks that I felt Notre Dame had a shot with that they ended up not going after. That would have been the one year that we saw it. And yeah, they don't have those guys listed. So like some people point to Hunter Johnson. I never was very high on Hunter Johnson. I never thought he was a great quarterback. Notre Dame had a shot early with Dwayne Haskins and just weren't able to kind of close the deal. I mean, honestly, other than 16 and 17 in most years, Notre Dame has got their top quarterback. I mean, they just have. I mean, Brandon Wimbush was their top quarterback. Hunter Keel was their top quarterback. Deshaun Kaiser was, one of their top quarterbacks. And if you look at some of the guys that they missed on when they got Deshaun Kaiser, I mean, they weren't necessarily Kyle Allen, was a guy that they liked, but I mean, he wasn't necessarily to me a great college quarterback. But for the most part, who they wanted, they got. The issues have been development. And I mean, that to me has been a much bigger problem for Notre Dame than have you been able to recruit top guys. It's can you develop the top guys when they get here? And I kind of got your question. So as far as like the guys that didn't back away or didn't push hard enough, I mean, I think that I've liked their quarterback recruiting. I just wish they would have coached some of those guys up better. Thomas Wall says, loved Clark and feel bad he got injured. Don't see how he can break into this rotation, guessing once healthy he transfers. I don't want to speculate on whether he's going to transfer or not, especially since he's so close to getting a degree. But it is an unfortunate situation, but that's football. And when you recruit the way that Notre Dame has, that's just going to be a part of it. Jonathan says, I think Notre Dame needs to do a better job of publicizing and contextualizing their history. I agree, but I mean, honestly, that's not going to impact recruiting if that's what you're getting at. What's going to impact recruiting is what they're doing now. That's ultimately what's going to happen. Nick says, if we don't see an Avery Davis double pass this year, we riot. I'm with you. I'm with you. If we don't see Avery Davis throw some sort of pass, Nick, I'm with you. We're gonna burn this mother down, buddy. Not literally, for all the people who have no sense of humor, but yeah, it needs to happen, man. And I don't care if it's against Toledo, but it needs to happen. You need to give teams on your schedule something to think about with Avery Davis, 100%. Because then it's like when you're running reverses with him or you're running like jet sweeps with him, you kind of got to think twice about, okay, is this guy going to pull up and throw it? And maybe you don't attack him as hard, and that allows him to run more. So 100% agree. Absolutely. Anthony Celatani, I hope I'm saying that right, Anthony. Do you think they would let Brian Kelly go if he doesn't make it to the college football playoff? Absolutely not, nor should they. Now, if they go 6-6 or 5-7, should they move on? Absolutely. But, you can say there's like a fine line for me, Anthony, and this is a fair question. I mean, because, again, the standard at Notre Dame is championships, right? And if he doesn't get there in year 11 – but it's more about, are you still moving in the right direction? And, you could have a bit of a step back, 10-2 this year. And, you're not a playoff team, but you're still a good football team. And has that positioned you to then make a run in 2022? I think we can be critical of a season in which maybe they lost to a team or two that they had better players and still say, okay, yeah, that's disappointing. They should have done A, B, and C differently, but they're still trending in the right direction. I think the only way that they would let Brian Kelly go, the only reason they should let Brian Kelly go, is if they take a big step back, like 8-4 or worse would be where I would be. Okay. And Searcher Green, I don't think it's so easy to say that they don't have a clear replacement. I mean, I think there's other coaches that could do a very good job at Notre Dame. I don't think Brian Kelly's the only coach that could win at Notre Dame. I think he's one of a small handful, but I do think there are other guys. So that is going to be it. I hate that we ended on firing the coach, but that's where we're at for today's show. And so thank you for everybody being with us today. I look forward to being back with you tomorrow. We are going to talk about the defensive line tomorrow. We're going to continue our sort of post-spring, pre-summer evaluation of where things stand with the Notre Dame the Notre Dame football team. And then, of course, tomorrow night, we're going to have at 8 o'clock tomorrow night, we're going to have a recruiting podcast, and we're going to dive into that. Still trying to figure out which topic we're going to discuss, but those are things that will be with us. So again, every day at 1 o'clock p.m., we'll have our show. So make sure that you're got those locked in. I will try to do better about getting the show ready earlier, so that way you have a little bit more time to be reminded. Jonathan, I'm always love a QB show, but I'm getting a little pushy waiting for the O-line, D-line show. Be back tomorrow, because tomorrow we're talking D-line. We'll get to O-line next week, but tomorrow we're going to talk D-line, and just for you. And then Matthew says Graham Mertz would be one, and that's the year that they got Brandon Clark. So yeah, I mean, I think you could say that, but then I think with Graham Mertz, I would still want to be talking about Tyler Buchner. So Graham Mertz is one. They wanted him bad. Remember, that was an interesting one, because that was after they had gotten Cade McNamara, lost him to Michigan, and I don't think they were upset about it. That relationship was a little strange. And then they made a hard push for Graham Mertz. If they had got on him a couple months earlier, I think they could have got him, Matthew. I really do. And as D-Rock says, remember, like, subscribe, hit the notifications bell, supporting Brian and this solid show. I appreciate that. And I hope you mean solid is excellent, because I think these are great shows. So I appreciate you always being a part of it, D-Rock. And appreciate everybody being with us. So again, every Monday to Friday, 1 o'clock, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, we'll have some sort of thematic show. Friday is our Friday free for all, our Notre Dame mailbag. And then Wednesday nights is our recruiting podcast. So tomorrow will be a team deal. Tomorrow night will be a recruiting show. On Thursday, we'll talk some sort of recruiting or team topic. It'll just be me. But tomorrow afternoon will be me and Vince. So have a great rest of your day, a great rest of your Tuesday. Hope everybody stays safe. And thanks for being part of the show. We'll talk to y'all again very, very soon.